In the heart of early 19th century North Carolina, a seemingly peaceful community was shaken by a haunting mystery that science and reason failed to solve. Behind closed doors within the walls of an esteemed institution lay secrets so disturbing they were intentionally buried by time. In 1804, in a small forgotten town, 3 identical triplets entered a deep, unexplained sleep, plunging an entire community into an enduring nightmare that challenged everything known about medicine and humanity. In the rural outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina, in the early months of 1804, an institution called the Asheville Home for Convalescent and Dependent Children stood quietly apart from society. Its thick stone walls, stark and imposing, offered an unsettling contrast against the lush green foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Although primarily built to shelter and rehabilitate vulnerable youth, the home soon became infamous in whispered conversations across nearby towns. The home, as locals simply called it, was founded in 1795 by Dr. Jeremiah Copeland, a physician trained at Philadelphia's University of Pennsylvania, widely respected for his progressive ideas in child care and disease treatment. Dr. Copeland was initially celebrated by the local community for his compassionate work, particularly after a devastating wave of scarlet fever swept through North Carolina in 1799, orphaning dozens of children. Copeland opened the doors of his institution to the surviving children, welcoming them with a promise of healing and refuge. But the home held secrets beneath its commendable facade, secrets that would eventually surface and tarnish Dr. Copeland's esteemed reputation. It was said that visitors rarely saw children playing outside the thick iron gates. Neighbors described the institution as silent and somber, with closed windows and drawn curtains, even during bright daylight hours. Despite these concerns, no formal accusations had been levied against Dr. Copeland or his staff, and the home continued its operation in near isolation, self-sufficient and financially supported by a handful of wealthy benefactors whose identities remained discreetly anonymous. Everything changed in January 1804 when the home admitted 3 orphaned triplets, Nathaniel, Samuel, and Elijah Goodwin, just 7 years old. Their parents, Arthur and Martha Goodwin, were prominent landowners from a nearby town, respected figures who had died tragically in a house fire just months before. The boys' striking resemblance, pale skin, piercing blue eyes, and bright blonde hair, quickly made them subjects of both curiosity and sympathy within the local community. But soon their story took a darker turn, transforming them into the very embodiment of the home's sinister reputation. Initially, the triplets seemed to adapt well. Dr. Copeland wrote in his meticulous journals that the boys exhibited polite behavior and were remarkably intelligent for their age. Their quick grasp of basic reading, writing, and arithmetic astonished their caretakers. However, in early March, barely 2 months after their admission, caretakers began noticing a strange lethargy spreading among the 3 boys. Initially, it was dismissed as exhaustion or grief following the loss of their parents, but it quickly escalated into something far more perplexing and terrifying. The boys started to fall into prolonged periods of sleep, becoming increasingly difficult to rouse. Dr. Copeland, at first intrigued rather than alarmed, recorded detailed observations in his journal, noting irregular breathing patterns and abnormally slow heart rates. He initially theorized that the children might be suffering from a rare medical condition, perhaps related to trauma or an unknown form of infectious disease. Dr. Copeland contacted esteemed colleagues across the country, including renowned doctors in Philadelphia, Boston, and Baltimore, but none could offer a definitive diagnosis or a helpful remedy. As weeks passed, the sleeping episodes grew longer. The triplets slept for days at a time, sometimes for entire weeks, with no apparent nourishment or hydration. Despite their lack of eating or drinking, their bodies showed no signs of deterioration, a fact that deeply troubled the institution's staff and Dr. Copeland himself. The local townspeople grew increasingly suspicious, their whispers turning into anxious speculation and finally fear. Despite mounting public concern, Dr. Copeland refused external help and prohibited anyone but a select few staff members from seeing the triplets. He argued that this was to protect the children's health, though rumors soon suggested otherwise. Some claimed that Dr. Copeland was deliberately hiding something sinister, a suggestion bolstered by the growing secrecy surrounding the institution. Inside the home, an atmosphere of dread and confusion settled in. Staff members began to speak in hushed tones about a curse or mysterious illness haunting the halls. Some claimed to have heard the boys murmuring incoherently in their sleep, uttering strange words or sentences that sounded foreign. The few nurses permitted near the triplets reported frightening experiences: chills, sudden inexplicable fatigue, and disturbing dreams. Local townspeople finally demanded an investigation. The county sheriff, Henry Walker, a cautious but respected man, was tasked with officially investigating these troubling allegations. On April 15, 1804, Sheriff Walker arrived at the home unannounced. His written report, preserved in historical archives, describes a chilling scene. Upon entry, the air felt oppressive, heavy. The rooms were exceedingly dark, with only sparse candlelight. Several children appeared subdued or sedated. Dr. Copeland greeted me with politeness, though seemed visibly agitated. Sheriff Walker pressed to see the triplets. Reluctantly, Dr. Copeland led him down a long corridor to a small, secluded room at the far end of the building. There, in near darkness, the three boys lay side by side on narrow cots. Their breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible, their pale skin waxy and smooth. The sheriff noted the unnatural stillness and absence of life's usual rhythms. He recalled feeling an unexplainable unease, as if something unseen and malevolent occupied the room. Upon his return to town, Sheriff Walker publicly shared his experience, which only fueled more sinister speculation. Newspapers from Raleigh to Charleston reported sensational stories, painting Dr. Copeland as either a desperate scientist chasing immortality or a disturbed villain exploiting helpless children for some obscure, unknown purpose. Dr. Copeland fiercely denied these accusations, publishing his notes and pleading his innocence, maintaining that the triplets' condition was purely medical and utterly beyond his control. Still, public opinion had turned decisively against him. The reputation he had spent nearly a decade building disintegrated overnight, leaving the home and its remaining residents increasingly isolated from the surrounding communities. By mid-May, Dr. Copeland reluctantly allowed a small group of distinguished physicians from Philadelphia to examine the boys. The visiting doctors confirmed Copeland's earlier observations. No disease known to medicine matched their symptoms. The examination left the visiting physicians deeply disturbed and baffled. Their official statement provided little comfort, concluding simply, "The affliction defies explanation." It seems to violate the laws of nature itself. By the summer of 1804, the community of Asheville had become consumed by fear, rumors, and suspicion. Families withdrew their financial support, and soon even the home's most loyal benefactors severed ties. Abandoned by the public and vilified in the press, Dr. Copeland became a shadow of his former self. As the institution's reputation crumbled, the sleeping triplets continued their unexplained slumber, locked behind closed doors, caught between life and death. The townspeople ceased trying to understand what science could not explain. Instead, they chose to bury the disturbing truth, shutting away both the home and its unsettling mysteries from collective memory. But stories like these, unsettling and stubbornly unforgettable, have a way of resurfacing. Secrets thought buried can emerge from darkness when least expected, waiting patiently for the right moment, the right ears, to finally be heard again. This was merely the beginning of the horrors hidden within the walls of the Asheville Home for Convalescent and Dependent Children, a place whose reputation, once built on compassion and hope, was now irrevocably stained by fear, doubt, and something far more sinister. The disturbing circumstances at the Asheville Home for Convalescent and Dependent Children did not arise overnight. Long before the haunting saga of the Goodwin triplets began, there were subtle warnings, small incidents quietly pushed aside or deliberately ignored. In retrospect, these signs formed a disturbing pattern of neglect and secrecy, laying the foundation for a tragedy that could have been prevented. Dr. Jeremiah Copeland had built the home's reputation meticulously. Initially, he was admired by influential families and respected colleagues alike. Asheville in the early 19th century was a rural town with limited medical facilities, and Dr. Copeland's arrival promised progressive care for vulnerable children. To the townspeople, he was a savior, but beneath this carefully curated image lay a troubling reality that gradually became impossible to overlook. Whispers first surfaced in 1799, shortly after the institution's establishment, when Mary Ellison, a young nurse hired to care for the home's first residents, abruptly left her position. Mary had been known in town for her compassion and competence, yet after only a few months working under Dr. Copeland, she returned to her family visibly distressed. Refusing to elaborate, Mary merely stated she had witnessed disturbing practices within the home and would not return under any circumstances. Locals speculated briefly, but soon forgot her claims, attributing them to youthful sensitivity rather than genuine alarm. In the spring of 1800, more troubling signs appeared. 2 children, Martha and Thomas Gray, siblings aged 9 and 10, had mysteriously disappeared from the institution overnight. Dr. Copeland, pressed for an explanation, offered a vague report that they had run away, escaping the institution during the night. Sheriff Walker searched the surrounding hills and forests extensively, but found no sign of the children, no footprints, no belongings, nothing. Despite the irregularities, the incident was accepted without further inquiry. Dr. Copeland's standing shielded him from scrutiny, his explanation quietly accepted in the absence of other evidence. Months later, in November of 1800, local merchants began reporting unusual orders placed by the institution. Not food or basic supplies, but significant quantities of sedatives, herbal remedies, and unfamiliar medicinal substances purchased from obscure sources. Isaac Coleman, a local apothecary, confided privately to his wife that Dr. Copeland's orders had become strange and troubling, including large quantities of narcotic preparations and sleeping aids like laudanum and tinctures rarely given to children. Yet even Coleman, who felt uneasy about supplying these substances, dared not openly challenge a respected physician. By 1801, more distressing signs emerged within the institution itself. Staff turnover increased alarmingly. Experienced caregivers, known for their dedication, began abruptly resigning, often without explanation. Those who dared speak hinted vaguely at dangerous medical experiments and unusually harsh discipline methods. But these accusations seldom reached beyond private conversation, as no one wished to jeopardize their livelihood or risk retaliation from Dr. Copeland, whose influence extended far beyond the home's walls. In September 1802, a former staff member named William Reed, having left Asheville for Charleston, wrote a troubling letter to Sheriff Walker. In it, Reed alleged that Dr. Copeland had subjected children under his care to unproven treatments, including extreme sedation and experimental substances with unknown side effects. Reed's letter painted Copeland as dangerously ambitious, consumed by a desire to achieve medical breakthroughs at any cost. Sheriff Walker, cautiously protective of Asheville's reputation and hesitant to accuse the esteemed doctor without proof, chose to quietly confront Copeland in a private conversation rather than initiate a formal investigation. Copeland calmly dismissed the allegations as baseless, labeling Reed as disgruntled and vengeful. The sheriff, persuaded by Copeland's composed demeanor and reassurances, dropped the matter entirely, further embedding the culture of secrecy and denial that would ultimately allow the home's darkest secrets to flourish. Throughout 1803, as the Goodwin family's own tragedy unfolded, the home quietly struggled to suppress further troubling developments. Several staff members confided privately to family members and friends about increasingly disturbing experiences. Sarah Mills, a caretaker, who resigned abruptly in October 1803, confided to her sister that she frequently saw children in states of near catatonia, sedated so heavily they could barely move or speak. Her warnings went unheeded, attributed to exaggeration or hysteria, easily dismissed because they challenged the carefully maintained illusion of order and benevolence at the home. It was into this growing atmosphere of denial and suspicion that Nathaniel, Samuel, and Elijah Goodwin arrived in January 1804. Orphaned by the fire that destroyed their home, the boys were placed under Copeland's care with hope for healing. Local citizens, sympathetic to their tragic loss, failed to see the warning signs that had accumulated over years. No one questioned Copeland's growing isolation, his increasing secrecy, or his reliance on experimental treatments, all overlooked due to his still powerful reputation and the community's collective unwillingness to confront an uncomfortable truth. Yet from their very first weeks inside the institution, the Goodwin triplets began exhibiting signs that something was profoundly wrong. Caregivers noted in private records, later unearthed from forgotten archives, that the boys appeared unusually withdrawn. Though initially bright and engaged in their lessons, the triplets soon fell into disturbing, lethargic states. Dr. Copeland assured worried staff members that the boys were merely grieving the loss of their parents and prescribed increasingly powerful sedatives to ease their distress. Nurses assigned to care for the Goodwin boys described disturbing symptoms even before their prolonged periods of sleep. Nurse Elizabeth Turner reported that Samuel, often the most alert and talkative of the three, occasionally appeared confused and frightened, repeatedly asking for his parents, seemingly unaware that they were dead. Elijah, who was typically quiet and reserved, began having prolonged episodes of staring blankly into space, completely unresponsive to stimuli. Nathaniel, the most fragile of the three, was observed falling asleep at odd hours and in strange locations, on staircases, in hallways, or even standing upright, collapsing suddenly without warning. Despite these disturbing occurrences, Dr. Copeland assured his staff that the triplets' symptoms were temporary and easily explained. His official stance emphasized compassion, grief management, and sedation as the appropriate responses. Privately, however, Dr. Copeland's journals reveal escalating concern. Entries became increasingly erratic, noting symptoms he could neither understand nor control. His growing frustration became evident, his attempts to manage their mysterious condition shifting gradually from professional curiosity into desperate obsession. In early March, the triplets entered their first prolonged sleep, an episode that lasted nearly 3 full days. Dr. Copeland privately documented this event with detached scientific interest, carefully noting vital signs and responses, but ignoring the deeper implications or emotional toll on the boys and his staff. Instead, he maintained the pretense of control, instructing caregivers to inform no one outside the institution about the boys' increasingly mysterious condition. Publicly, Copeland continued to project calm and confidence, successfully convincing the community and local authorities that everything was under control. Behind closed doors, however, the institution's foundations were weakening, the facade barely holding under the weight of accumulated secrecy. Caretakers grew increasingly afraid and suspicious, aware that something profoundly wrong was happening within the home's walls, but unable or unwilling to challenge Dr. Copeland openly. By the time Sheriff Walker finally visited the home in April 1804, the atmosphere had deteriorated into palpable dread. Walker's disturbing encounter with the sleeping triplets was the culmination of years of ignored signs, a tragedy rooted in negligence and silence. Had anyone heeded the earlier warnings, the vanished Gray children, Mary Ellison's sudden departure, William Reed's troubling letter, perhaps the horror of the Goodwin triplets might have been prevented. Instead, the institution and the community surrounding it chose to bury their fears and doubts, ignoring each troubling signal until the signs could no longer be denied. By the spring of 1804, Asheville's darkest chapter was already written, waiting only for the final chilling revelations that would soon force the hidden truths into the light. By late May 1804, the mystery surrounding the sleeping Goodwin triplets had consumed the small town of Asheville, North Carolina. The local population, initially sympathetic, now openly feared the institution they had once trusted. The Asheville Home for Convalescent and Dependent Children, once a beacon of hope, was now viewed with suspicion and dread. Its doors remained firmly closed, guarded by silence and denial. But secrets rarely remain buried, especially when they're as dark and unsettling as the truth about Dr. Jeremiah Copeland's institution. On June 6, 1804, the situation reached a breaking point. Sheriff Henry Walker received a frantic visit from Nurse Elizabeth Turner, who had been dismissed from the home just days earlier. Turner arrived at Walker's home visibly shaken, her voice trembling as she spoke of unimaginable horrors she'd witnessed within the walls of the institution. Walker, who had already felt deeply disturbed by his own brief experience at the home, knew it was finally time to act. With a growing sense of urgency, Sheriff Walker assembled a small group of trusted deputies and several concerned citizens, including Isaac Coleman, the local apothecary. On the morning of June 8, 1804, the group approached the home determined to uncover the truth. Dr. Copeland, confronted with overwhelming public outrage, had no choice but to allow the inspection. Reluctantly, he unlocked the heavy iron gates, allowing Sheriff Walker and his companions to enter. Inside, the group was immediately struck by the oppressive atmosphere. The once welcoming hallways now felt cold, silent, and dark. As they moved deeper into the building, it became clear how isolated the institution had become. Few caretakers remained. Those who stayed appeared nervous, avoiding eye contact and speaking in hushed tones. Children, pale and listless, watched the visitors warily from doorways and shadowy corners, further unsettling the group. Sheriff Walker demanded immediate access to the room where the Goodwin triplets were being kept. Dr. Copeland hesitated briefly before conceding, leading them down a corridor to a locked door. Opening it revealed a sight that horrified even the most stoic among them. The triplets lay side by side in an unnatural sleep, unchanged from Walker's initial visit 2 months earlier. Their skin remained pale, almost translucent, their bodies impossibly motionless. The group recoiled instinctively, sensing the profound wrongness of what they were witnessing. Isaac Coleman, deeply unsettled, began examining the room and noticed empty vials and glass containers scattered nearby. Some labels were still readable: opium extracts, tinctures of nightshade, experimental sedatives. Coleman quietly informed Walker, confirming suspicions that Copeland had subjected the boys to heavy sedation, likely contributing to their inexplicable condition. Pressed by the sheriff, Copeland finally began to unravel, admitting slowly and reluctantly to conducting unauthorized medical experiments. He revealed a long-standing ambition to uncover new treatments for severe trauma and grief, using sedatives and narcotics to induce deep states of unconsciousness. Copeland insisted his intentions were scientific, aimed at helping children who had experienced profound loss or emotional suffering. Yet as he spoke, it became clear he had lost himself in his dangerous obsession, unable or unwilling to see the suffering he had inflicted. Walker ordered an immediate search of the entire institution. Deputies and citizens dispersed, searching every room, cellar, and locked chamber. What they uncovered shocked even the most cynical among them. Hidden rooms revealed neglected, half-starved children in various stages of sedation or withdrawal. Disturbingly, the search uncovered a cellar beneath the east wing, locked behind heavy doors and concealed behind shelving. Inside, deputies discovered diaries meticulously documenting Copeland's experiments. The pages detailed chilling procedures. Children administered dangerous narcotic cocktails, induced into extended sleep states to study their reactions. The journals also chillingly noted the deaths of several children, discreetly buried in shallow graves on the property. A sense of horror rippled through the group, confirming their worst fears. As the day progressed, the scale of Copeland's abuses became undeniable, even to his most fervent defenders. By evening, Dr. Copeland was formally arrested and taken to the Asheville jail, charged with criminal negligence, child endangerment, and murder. News of the atrocities spread rapidly throughout North Carolina and beyond. Newspapers sensationalized the gruesome discoveries, labeling Copeland a monster. and his institution a house of horrors, Asheville, once proud of the home, recoiled in collective shame. Anger turned swiftly to guilt, as citizens struggled to understand how such evils could have been hidden in plain sight, quietly allowed to flourish by years of silent complicity. Yet amid this horror, one mystery remained unsolved: the Goodwin triplets' baffling condition. Despite the immediate removal of sedatives, the boys failed to wake. Medical experts summoned from Boston and Philadelphia worked tirelessly to revive them, but quickly concluded their condition was beyond medical knowledge. With heavy hearts, the doctors determined the triplets had entered a permanent, irreversible sleep state, a living death from which they would never recover. The townspeople viewed the boys as tragic victims, symbolic of an institution and a community that had catastrophically failed. Public outrage reached a climax during Copeland's trial in September 1804. Testimony from former staff members, including Elizabeth Turner and Isaac Coleman, revealed in chilling detail the extent of Copeland's experiments. Coleman testified to supplying narcotics that Copeland deceitfully claimed were for legitimate medical purposes, only later realizing their true use. Elizabeth Turner tearfully recounted witnessing children deteriorate mentally and physically, sedated to the brink of death. The courtroom erupted into angry shouts as Copeland's defense faltered, unable to justify his actions beyond claims of misguided scientific curiosity. Ultimately, Dr. Copeland was convicted of multiple crimes, including manslaughter and gross negligence. He received a sentence of life imprisonment, but the damage had already been done. Asheville's sense of innocence had been permanently shattered. Trust in community leaders had vanished, replaced by suspicion and fear. Families who had once proudly supported the institution now grappled with shame, haunted by the realization that their silence and denial had permitted unimaginable horrors. With Copeland's conviction, the Asheville Home for Convalescent and Dependent Children was permanently shuttered. Surviving residents were relocated to more reputable facilities across the state, though the scars, both physical and emotional, would never fully heal. As for the Goodwin triplets, the authorities faced a heartbreaking decision. The boys, forever locked in their mysterious, unending sleep, became wards of the state, transferred to a facility in Raleigh specifically designed for long-term, irreversible conditions. There they would remain indefinitely, living reminders of a nightmare that science failed to explain and society had tragically ignored. The home's building was left abandoned, its walls gradually decaying as the years passed. Locals avoided the area, haunted by memories and whispers of the atrocities committed within. Dr. Copeland died in prison in 1818, his once celebrated reputation irrevocably disgraced, his name synonymous with cruelty and misguided ambition. But the story of the sleeping triplets endured, passed down through generations as a cautionary tale. Their inexplicable condition, a mystery beyond science, became emblematic of the dangers of unchecked power, secrecy, and denial. Asheville learned a harsh lesson about the price of ignoring uncomfortable truths and the irreversible harm caused when signs of suffering are willfully dismissed. Yet as the town slowly rebuilt, the community remained haunted by a lingering question: what had truly happened to Nathaniel, Samuel, and Elijah Goodwin? Their fate remained unexplained, a sinister mystery that no rational explanation could satisfy. The truth, as Asheville discovered, could be far more terrifying than ignorance. The legacy of the Asheville Home for Convalescent and Dependent Children did not end with Dr. Jeremiah Copeland's imprisonment or the permanent sleep of the Goodwin triplets. Instead, it settled into a dark, lingering silence, a shadow over Asheville that persisted for generations. The horrors discovered within those walls left deep wounds in the community psyche, wounds that neither time nor distance could fully heal. By 1820, the abandoned institution had become a chilling reminder of humanity's darkest capabilities. Its structure, once impressive and promising, stood dilapidated, overtaken by vegetation. Parents warned children not to venture near the site, claiming it was haunted by the memories of those who had suffered and died within. While the town collectively turned its back on the institution, the stories refused to fade away completely. In Raleigh, the Goodwin triplets continued their mysterious, unending sleep, confined within a quiet facility far removed from public view. Medical experts periodically visited, driven by curiosity and professional intrigue. However, each examination concluded similarly. No known medical explanation could account for the triplets' unchanging condition. They became a medical enigma, their existence carefully hidden from public scrutiny, too unsettling to confront openly. The silence surrounding the Goodwin brothers began to deepen. Over time, medical records were sealed, and mentions of their condition became increasingly rare, eventually disappearing from public records entirely. They were quietly forgotten, just as their parents' deaths and Dr. Copeland's crimes gradually receded into the community's collective memory. Yet beneath this deliberate forgetting, Asheville residents continued to grapple privately with the aftermath of the tragedy. Families of children who had been housed in the home struggled with lasting trauma, guilt, and anger. Relatives of those who had vanished or died within the institution remained haunted by unanswered questions, uncertain if their loved ones' remains still lay hidden beneath the grounds. In 1832, decades after Copeland's incarceration, local historian Samuel Walker, grandson of Sheriff Henry Walker, attempted to revive interest in the forgotten tragedy by documenting detailed accounts in his private journal. Walker's meticulous records included interviews with surviving staff members, former residents, and their descendants. Despite his efforts, publishers refused to print the stories, fearing the revival of an unsettling chapter better left forgotten. Walker's writings were quietly shelved in the Asheville Public Library archives, their unsettling truths deliberately suppressed. By the mid-19th century, Asheville had grown into a thriving mountain town, actively promoting its fresh air and natural beauty to visitors and settlers alike. Tourism blossomed, and the town carefully curated its image, distancing itself from any mention of the past horrors. When travelers inevitably stumbled upon rumors of the old home, locals quickly dismissed them as exaggerations or ghost stories, emphasizing progress and prosperity instead. In this way, the sinister truth was smothered beneath layers of silence and denial. Yet as decades passed, the buried secrets occasionally resurfaced in troubling ways. In 1879, during construction of a new road near the original site, workers unearthed several shallow, unmarked graves. Although authorities quickly dismissed these discoveries as remnants of forgotten pioneer burials, older residents quietly suspected otherwise. The graves were hastily reburied, and construction continued uninterrupted, reflecting the community's enduring determination to maintain the silence surrounding their dark legacy. Throughout the early 20th century, fragments of the past continued to surface, disturbing the community's fragile peace. Letters, diaries, and medical records sporadically appeared, hidden away in attics, libraries, or estate collections. Each new revelation briefly reignited interest, only to fade away again, swiftly suppressed by those determined to keep the truth buried. In 1927, a particularly troubling discovery emerged when construction crews demolished the remnants of the home, planning to build a modern hospital in its place. Behind one decaying wall, workers discovered a hidden compartment containing hundreds of pages of Dr. Copeland's handwritten notes, disturbingly detailed records of his experiments previously unknown to historians. Authorities quickly seized these records, sealing them away in state archives. The incident briefly captured local newspaper attention, prompting uncomfortable questions about the town's unresolved past. Still, within weeks, the controversy faded, intentionally silenced once again. Even the tragic story of the Goodwin triplets resurfaced in small, haunting ways. In 1954, a North Carolina physician named Dr. Benjamin Hart stumbled upon historical medical files describing the triplets' condition while researching unexplained sleep disorders. Intrigued, Dr. Hart attempted to access the original records, only to discover that all official documentation regarding the triplets had been intentionally destroyed or hidden. Hart spent years quietly investigating, eventually concluding that powerful interests had deliberately erased the Goodwin triplets from medical history, their story too disturbing and inexplicable to confront openly. Dr. Hart's own writings, compiled privately, speculated that the Goodwin brothers' permanent sleep might have been caused by profound neurological damage induced by prolonged narcotic exposure, an accidental medical anomaly resulting from Copeland's reckless experimentation. Yet Hart himself conceded that his theory was unprovable. When he attempted to publish his findings, professional journals declined, unwilling to reopen wounds long sealed by silence. Disillusioned, Hart eventually abandoned his research, joining generations of others whose attempts to confront the truth had similarly failed. By the late 20th century, the Goodwin triplets' legacy persisted primarily through hushed whispers, passed down by older generations. Asheville continued its transformation into a modern, picturesque town, bustling with tourists and new residents blissfully unaware of the dark history beneath their feet. Historical markers commemorated prominent local events, but none mentioned the home or its victims. The community's collective silence had successfully rendered the tragedy invisible, hidden beneath Asheville's carefully maintained veneer of small-town charm. Yet silence is rarely absolute. By the 1980s, Asheville's forgotten past began quietly resurfacing among a new generation drawn to uncovering hidden histories. Local historians, amateur investigators, and journalists periodically attempted to unearth the institution's dark past, facing persistent resistance. Archives, when accessible, yielded tantalizing clues. Diaries, letters, and partial records referencing the home, Dr. Copeland, and cryptic mentions of the sleeping triplets. Each discovery seemed to deepen the mystery rather than resolve it. Researchers found mentions of the Goodwin triplets abruptly ceasing around 1815, with no official record of their deaths or burials. The unsettling absence of closure fueled renewed speculation about their fate, generating theories ranging from their quiet deaths and secret burials to disturbing suggestions that they had been hidden away permanently to prevent further scandal. Despite these investigative efforts, Asheville maintained its collective silence, unwilling to confront the full extent of its dark legacy. Local authorities remained uninterested or actively hostile, protecting the town's carefully cultivated image rather than addressing uncomfortable truths. As the century ended, the horrors uncovered in 1804 seemed destined to remain permanently suppressed, surviving only in fragmented whispers, locked away in archives, or passed quietly between generations, unwilling or unable to forget. Yet history, no matter how deeply buried, has a stubborn way of persisting. The Goodwin triplets, Dr. Copeland's experiments, and Asheville's complicity continued to haunt the collective memory of those brave enough to confront the truth. Their story, though suppressed, persisted quietly beneath layers of silence, waiting patiently to resurface. Perhaps the greatest horror uncovered by the tragedy was not the inexplicable fate of 3 innocent boys, but the ease with which society could ignore, deny, and ultimately forget suffering that occurred in plain sight. Asheville's legacy, like the triplets themselves, remained trapped in an endless sleep, suspended between truth and denial, forever a sinister reminder of humanity's capacity for silence, complicity, and erasure. But truth, no matter how deeply buried, inevitably returns, waiting patiently for those brave enough to finally confront it. If this story impacted you, if you stayed until the end, it's because you feel these hidden truths also need to be exposed. So leave in the comments the city you're watching from. This way we can see how far these stories are reaching, and subscribe to the channel. There are many other cases the world tried to forget, but we insist on remembering.